Today you might say that I have a two-ring circus going on in my driveway because I have two of Kia's latest Un-Minivans, the new 2022 Carnival. Let's be honest, they really are minivans, but Kia would like you to call them multi-purpose vehicles because minivan just doesn't sound cool enough anymore. If you didn't know it by now, the Carnival is the replacement for the Sedona in the United States, and it continues the trend that the Sedona started in the Kia lineup, trying to be the Un-Minivan. Because according to Kia, MPVs are cooler than the minivan name, and minivan doesn't quite represent what Kia has going on here for the Carnival. But let's be honest, marketing aside, these are definitely minivans. And interestingly enough, even though they sell better outside the United States than inside the United States, these certainly follow the American minivan formula, the one that's made the Chrysler Pacifica, the Sienna, and the Odyssey such a success in the United States. And that's quite different than the Hyundai minivan that is sold in the domestic market of Korea. The biggest difference is that the Carnival is wider, so you can fit 4x8 sheets of plywood, for instance, in this Carnival right here. This one doesn't have the removable second row. That's because this is the new top-end version, the SX Prestige, with the throne-like second row seats. In this video, I'm going to be talking about both of these trims. This is the top-end SX model, the most expensive one you can get with 8 passenger capacity, and this one over here is just the most expensive Carnival you can get. Just how well does the Carnival sell overseas? Well, in October of 2020, this was the second best-selling anything in South Korea. Kia has recently decided to harmonize the naming scheme across their lineup, and that's why this minivan is now called the Carnival in the United States and not the Sedona. It's always been called the Carnival in other markets, and for some reason the Sedona in the US, they decided that was kind of silly. Let's just call them the same name everywhere, and for some reason they decided on Carnival rather than Sedona. This is the top-end SX Prestige model, so we have projector headlights. These are really quite distinctive because we have 2 modules here for the high beams and then 2 modules over here for the low beams. We have this very distinctive LED accent strip. In the top-end SX Prestige model, this is also the turn signal, which is an LED. Other versions of the Carnival, and I'll apologize in advance if I accidentally call this a Sedona at any point in this video, have reflector headlights. Again, low beams on the outboard side, high beams on the inboard side, but you can see that we have an incandescent turn signal right here rather than the LED turn signal that we find in the top-end trim. The LED fog lights down at the bottom you'll find in a number of different trims. Be sure and let me know what you think about the look down there in the comment section. I think that one of the South Korean domestic market grills is my favorite, but unfortunately we can't get that one in the United States. Now the base model does get a very different grill. I'll put pictures of those on the screen so you can see what they look like. But you should know that this portion of the grill right here is the only part where air actually goes through. This upper section right here is blanked off for aerodynamic reasons. Now, I think that that could be a little bit tricky to clean because this is definitely very, very raised. These little chrome blocks are probably about 3/4 of an inch from the rest of that grille module. And then this very concept car looking like front end with these separate headlamp modules, there's a lot of areas where bugs could end up. Now, fortunately, I don't live in an area of the country with a lot of bugs, but if you do, that might be a consideration. Let's get back to the MPV thing for a moment. Clearly, minivan purpose vehicle. Kia is really trying hard, as they did in the previous generation Sedona, to make this look a little bit more crossover-like, and you can really tell that by what's going on right back here. This rear-end styling reminds me an awful lot, honestly, of some of General Motors' large SUVs. We have a smaller third-row window for no particular reason other than just styling, and then this large bar right here, which has really an interesting 3D texture to it. Now, we still have sliding doors, as you'd expect in a minivan, and we still have a very low step in height for the front and for the rear. But a little bit unexpected is the ground clearance. The Carnival has 6.8 inches of ground clearance. This is about 2.5 inches higher off the ground than the Honda Odyssey. So if you're looking at a minivan and you're worried about clearing obstacles in your driveway or snow, etc., this is going to be considerably higher than the Honda, and actually the highest minivan available in America in terms of ground clearance. But all-wheel drive is not an option on the Carnival. Despite the SUV-like styling, this is almost exactly the same size as the rest of the mainstream minivans in America: the Odyssey, the Pacifica, the Voyager, and the Sienna. All of these minivans are basically within 2 inches of one another and all have a very distinctive feature that we don't generally find in minivans not originally intended for sale in the United States. As I said before, you can fit 4x8 sheet goods in here, which means this is a wider vehicle than the Hyundai minivan that you'll find in South Korea. Also wider than most of the minivans or MPVs or whatever it is that you want to call this particular segment, all the way across Europe, South America, and other world markets. As you'd expect out of a vehicle named Prestige, we have a very distinctive LED strip running all the way across the rear hatch. Turn signals remain incandescent and backup lights are down there at the bottom. You'll see them blinking over there on that side. This is much more distinctive than the base tail lamp arrangement that we find over there on the other model. The wannabe SUV styling continues at the bottom of the Carnival's bumper, where we find what looks like a skid plate but is just part of that rear bumper trim. Under this hood, we find Kia's latest 3.5-liter V6 engine. It produces 290 horsepower, which is the most in this segment, and 262 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission, front-wheel drive only, and you'll get 22 miles per gallon combined. I really wish that Kia had decided to give the Carnival available all-wheel drive, because in the snow belt you'll notice that a lot of folks tend to gravitate towards some of the all-wheel drive options. That used to be the Toyota Sienna. In its latest version, however, it has gone to e-all-wheel drive since it is hybrid only, and the only mechanical all-wheel drive available in a minivan in North America currently is the Chrysler Pacifica. Front seat comfort is excellent, and to be honest, most of the minivans available in the US are pretty comparable in the top-end trims especially. We have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support, multi-way adjustable driver's seat, and a manual tilt telescopic steering column. We have a 2-position seat memory over there on the door. It's worth noting that even in this top-end SX Prestige trim, the front passenger seat does not have the 4-way lumbar support that we find on the driver's seat. However, the seat bottom cushion does adjust for height and for tilt. If you've been to Asia, then you may know that ridiculously comfortable minivans are definitely a thing outside of North America. And in this vehicle and in the Toyota Sienna, we get a little bit of a taste of that, because these two vehicles offer features that we don't find in all the minivans available here, like the ottomans that we find here. But Kia takes things to a new level because this seat is powered in the second row. I can power fold the ottoman right there. I can adjust the seat bottom cushion for tilt. I can recline it. I have butterfly style headrests. Really the only thing missing back here is 4-way adjustable lumbar support. That would be really kind of a handy feature. And it is worth noting that the ventilated seat controls are just a little far away from the driver when I'm reclined, and I also have to sit up to open my moonroof here, because rather than a single pane of glass like we find in the Chrysler Pacifica, if you get this model, we get a 2-pane moonroof system, and both of them open. So the front moonroof right there over the driver and front passenger opens, and so does this one right here. Now, it is worth noting that if you get the ridiculously comfortable thrones in the second row, it does make getting into the third row a little bit tricky. You can see these seats really slide forward and backward quite far, but because the recline mechanism and the tilt forward mechanism is powered and the switches are inboard here on the seat, you do have to spend a little bit of time tilting these seats in a way to make it easier to get back there into the third row, or you'd have to slide them forward and then scoot them outboard, because they do go forward and backward and side to side, so that we could try and climb through the middle there. But of course, this seat is in its reclined position, so in order to really get through the middle, I have to wait for this one to recline, or unrecline itself, I should say. There's one button to make this a little bit easier, so it doesn't take quite as long as you might think. Still have to wait for it though. And then I have to use the seat controls over here to slide the seat forward. If I can get the right control, there we go. Slide the seat forward. So again, slide the seat forward, and then I can slide it outboard, and then I could try and climb through the middle. Now let's talk about the version that I think most people are going to be interested in. This SX trim is an 8-passenger model. 8-passenger seating is available in every trim except for the top-end SX Prestige. Now, based on the way these minivans are equipped, this model, not the SX Prestige, is the corollary to something like the Honda Odyssey Elite. The SX Prestige is one step above that. Depending on the features you're looking for in your new vehicle, you may find that this is one of the better equipped vehicles that still has the 8th seat in it. Now, the second row seat is made of 3 modules. We have 2 outboard seats that slide forward and backward. They slide quite far forward, if I can do that from the center position right here, but not quite far enough forward for an adult to really easily go through this gap over here. Now, the seats do move in a different direction, so if I pull this lever over here, then they will tilt and slide forward, so that way an adult could more easily get into the back. You cannot leave a child seat latched into place and still move the seat in that manner. In this generation of Carnival, the second row seats do come out, so I simply tumble them forward, right like that, pop that down, then there's a lever on the back, I can pull that, and then pull this seat module out of the vehicle. These seats weigh 67 pounds, so they're a little bit lighter than the ones in the Odyssey, but 7 pounds heavier than the ones in the Pacifica. At the moment, the new Sienna seats do not come out of the vehicle at all. 67 pounds doesn't seem too bad for me, but if you have back issues, you definitely want to keep that in mind before you think about removing the second row seats. The reason these seats are heavier than the ones in the Pacifica is because the shoulder belts are part of the second row seat mechanism itself, not part of the vehicle. And that's true for the middle seat module as well, although clearly this is lighter than the outboard seats. One odd thing with this middle seat module is it has a really long seat track. If I scoot it forward, you can actually see how far that seat track goes back there. It goes far enough back that if you want it all the way in its rearmost position, you actually have to fold the third row seats into the floor. One nice touch with this seat design is that even though we have rails in the floor where things like Cheerios or gravel might get stuck off your shoes, we don't have any big bulky modules like we find in the top-end versions of the Odyssey back here. So if you remove the second row and you fold the third row into the floor, we do have essentially a flat load floor. Before I hop into the third row, let me show you the hilarity that is this center seat. This is all the way back in its rearmost position. This seat is all the way back in its rearmost position. You can see it goes quite far back. I'm not entirely clear why you would want this seat to do this, but if you want to, it certainly will. In this seating position, you cannot use the third row. The third row has to be completely folded back there into the floor. And it is worth noting that you cannot put the outboard seats in this center seat track because the track width is not the same. They're all removable from the vehicle, so if I want to remove this one, simply pull this bit of webbing here, flop it forward. I can use the cup holders in the back or this little tray area right there. Then I pull another bit of webbing and then I can pull it out of the vehicle. As with the rest of the vehicle's dimensions, legroom figures are very, very close between all the major minivans in America. I have a little bit less legroom in here than in the Sienna or the Odyssey, but honestly, you'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference. The front seat is very comfortably set for me at 6 feet tall. This second row seat is all the way back in its tracks, and as you can see, I have about 2 inches of legroom left. If you're looking for a vehicle that can comfortably seat 8 passengers and perhaps 6 or 7 passengers worth of luggage, or 8 if they pack a little bit light, that is definitely going to be the Carnival. As far as third row headroom goes, this comes in a little bit below the Pacifica, which surprised me. Based on the numbers, you'd think that all these minivans would be pretty similar, but the Pacifica is the only one that I can really sit back in and have my head not touching the ceiling. In this vehicle, it is just barely touching the ceiling, but it's still pretty comfortable because if I was sitting in a more natural seating position like this, then I have about 1 inch of headroom left. It just has to do with the way the ceiling is shaped back here as it gets closer to that rear hatch. As with the competition, this is a 3-row bench. It's a little bit higher off the ground than the average 3-row crossover, and most importantly, wider as well. So comparing this against something like the Kia Telluride, the rear bench is going to be wider and more accommodating for adults or larger children. When you look at the numbers, it appears that Kia decided to reduce legroom inside a little bit in order to give us the biggest cargo area in the minivan segment. I have to admit that when I first saw the numbers for the Carnival, I thought it was a typo. And I went into my roller bag test thinking there's no way that this will be able to accommodate more than 6 roller bags, but indeed I was able to squeeze 8 roller bags back here, 2 more than in any other minivan currently on sale here. 24-inch roller bags are larger than the size that you're allowed to carry on, so as you can see, you can definitely put luggage for 7 or 8 for a weekend away and very comfortably fit those passengers inside as well. The cargo practicality is all due to the way that Kia carved out space back here. Most minivans are about 48 inches across the rear wheel wells, but after the rear wheel wells behind them in this minivan, Kia made the cargo area wider between this side and this side. And that's how I was able to squeeze 8 of those roller bags back here. And as you can see, I can actually stretch my legs out and I still have a bit of room to spare. In competitive minivans, this cargo well that the third row seats fold into is not quite as wide. Even though the width across the top is a little bit wider in some of those competitors, the width across the bottom is the best in the Carnival, and that's how this cargo area fits all those bags in. Very clearly, when it comes to my trunk comfort index, this has to get 10 out of 10 points. Now, I will say that these third row seats, the way that they move is a little bit different than the Odyssey and Pacifica seats. They move pretty much the same way that the Sienna's seats do. So we have hinges right here that are visible and occupy a little bit of cargo room. We have one handle here and the seat collapses like that, and then you latch it down into place like that. This is a little bit trickier to do one-handed than in the seats that we find in the Pacifica and the Odyssey, but I think you will get the hang of it over time. Taking a closer look at a few things back here, you can see that the two-tone color scheme continues in the third row. We find a USB charge-only port, 3 cup holders total for the third row seats, 2 on one side, 1 on the other. Then all the way back here by the cargo hatch, we find a 12-volt power port and a 100-watt AC inverter. I'm a little disappointed by the output of this inverter system because you can operate a microwave in the new Sienna. On the left side of the cargo area, we find some additional storage cubbies, and yes, there is a spare tire. It's located under the vehicle. Let's take a quick spin around the Prestige model. This will give you an idea of what the moonroofs look like. We have a pretty standard sized moonroof right here over the driver and front passenger seats. Height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, but I did notice that they don't go terribly high up the B-pillar. I did find them a little bit low for me. We have the controls for the rear climate control zone right here, 3-zone climate control in this vehicle. Those controls are lock-outable from the front, so if you don't want your kids playing with them, you can turn them off. And as you can see, we have that larger pane right back there over the second row seats. And this gives you an idea of how far those seats recline. You can see that headrest is right back there by where the third row would normally go. Those are the armrests and cup holders for the third row seats. To make it more luxurious for whoever might be lucky enough to be transported back there, the front passenger seat moves quite far forward, and then we have controls on the side to make it easier to scoot that seat up and out of the way. We have a USB charge-only port for the second row folks, and this is what the inputs look like on the rear seat entertainment system. This is a dual screen system with the screens integrated into the seat backs. You see that we have an HDMI input, a USB port, auxiliary input, and then a headphone jack. The interior is definitely styled like the rest of the Kia lineup in the United States. We have a soft touch injection molded upper section of the dashboard. This is not after stitched. The stitches are actually part of the injection molded pattern. Below that, we have two large air vents and the strong chrome bar that connects them, giving it sort of an Audi 5000 vibe. You can get imitation wood or this really interesting 3D textured metallic strip right here. It's actually not really metal as I understand it. It's just a metallicized plastic strip. We have a pretty decently sized glove compartment on the passenger side, but I was not able to fit a tablet computer inside. If you want the most screen real estate in your next van, you're definitely going to want to take a look at the Carnival because we have two 12.3-inch LCDs in the dashboard if you get this top-end trim. The regular SX trim has a 12-inch screen here, basically the same screen, and then a smaller 7-inch cluster in the middle, very similar to what we see in other Kia vehicles. As you can see, it supports full Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration, and you can either use the entire screen if you want to, or you can reserve the right side of the screen for additional system functions. This has the latest version of Kia's infotainment software. It's very similar to what we see in other Kia and Hyundai models. Same sort of modern icon scheme going on here that we see in those other vehicles as well. One of the interesting touches in this system is that there is a home screen that's a little bit more calming. It gives you the external temperature, the infotainment output, and then a moving map display based on the vehicle's navigation system that sort of fades from one side to the other. As we see in other people movers, there's a rear camera view. There's also a passenger talk intercom system, so that makes it a little bit easier to talk with the passengers in the back. And one touch that I really hadn't expected is that back here in the module that houses the camera for the rear passenger view, we also have a voice command button, so the rear passengers can voice command the system. Continuing down the dashboard, we have a bank of touch buttons. This is kind of a new thing for Kia. Normally they have a row of physical buttons across, but these are all capacitive touch buttons for the climate control system and for the infotainment system. They seem to respond to my finger presses pretty easily, but I do think that it is a little bit easier to determine exactly what you're stabbing if they were physical buttons. Below that, we have two USB charge-only ports, one USB input for the system, Qi wireless charging mat, a small cubby area where you can store your keys, things like that. And then you can see sort of the downside of this wannabe SUV styling. We don't have as many storage cubbies as we find in the other minivans in the United States. So under the center console, there's no additional storage area. We have a shifter that's very similar to other SUV shifters. Drive down there, manual mode over to the left side. We have buttons for the drive mode selector. It allows us to choose between smart, normal, eco, and sport. An electric parking brake, auto brake hold. The controls for the front heated and ventilated seats are toggles. We have a button for the heated steering wheel, parking sensors, and 360-degree camera system. The vehicle's remote is a bit of a twist on key fobs that we've seen from Kia before. Along this thinner edge of the key, we have the buttons for lock, unlock, the rear hatch, and the emergency horn. And then we have on this side buttons for the sliding doors and the remote start system. I don't find this key design as intuitive or easy to use as the keys in the Sienna or in the Pacifica, but I think it's pretty similar to the Odyssey. Between the front seats, we have a padded center armrest that opens to reveal one of the smaller storage cubbies you'll find in an American minivan. I was able to put a gallon of milk in here, but the lid wouldn't close because it's not quite tall enough in that area. Behind there, we have two large cup holders and then an additional slot in the middle where you can put wallets or smartphones. This is the only vehicle in the segment to give us a full LCD instrument cluster, and it offers 4 different designs. But aside from that, the amount of information that you get in the system and the customization ability is pretty similar to other Kia models. The steering wheel is a round design with a large split bottom spoke, so it's almost a 4-spoke steering wheel really. We have sport grips up top. This one is leather wrapped. In the center, you can see the new Kia logo that will be spreading to other vehicles in their lineup. We have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control over here on this side, controls for that multifunction LCD, the button and toggle, and then on this side we find controls for the infotainment system along with the voice command button and then phone button. Out on the road, you'll definitely notice the extra oomph in the Carnival versus some of the other vans in America. You get a little bit of front wheel peel in first gear and definitely decent acceleration. This model went 0 to 60 in 7.2 seconds. Now, that is actually a little bit slower than the Honda Odyssey, and the main reason for that is the Honda Odyssey's transmission. It has Honda's newer 10-speed automatic, and it has some really aggressive starting ratios and very closely spaced ratios at the bottom as well. That really gives it excellent 0 to 60 acceleration, but once you're out on the highway in terms of passing power, they're actually going to be very, very similar. And this is definitely faster than the Toyota Sienna. The Sienna, with its new hybrid system, is very efficient, but it is not terribly swift. This is about a second and a half faster 0 to 60. When you start taking a look at the spec sheet, most of these vehicles are very close together. The curb weight of this is very close to the Honda Odyssey and relatively close to the Chrysler Voyager or the Chrysler Pacifica. The Sienna is a little bit heavier because of its standard hybrid system, and of course, the Chrysler Pacifica hybrid is the heaviest because of its big battery pack right behind the first row seats. In my braking test, it took 124 feet for this to stop from 60 to 0, which is pretty respectable as far as vehicles in this segment goes. And braking, acceleration, and handling times are also substantially similar to the larger three-row crossovers that we find in the US. So the Palisade, the Telluride, the Atlas, the Chevy Traverse, they're all going to be basically in the same neighborhood. But when it comes to handling, you may be surprised that a vehicle like this or the Pacifica or Odyssey can actually feel a little bit better out on the road than some of those larger crossovers. And a lot of that has to do with the center of gravity and the ground clearance. These are closer to the ground than most of those three-row crossovers. Now, with nearly 7 inches of clearance, this is a little bit higher than average in the minivan segment, and it does feel like we get a little bit more tip and dive, a little bit more body roll than in some. But generally speaking, this is still going to be more engaging than some of those big SUVs out there that you might want to be cross-shopping with the Carnival in a weird sort of way. You could logically cross-shop this against something like a Chevy Tahoe or an Expedition or a Sequoia or an Armada if you're simply looking for 7 or 8 passenger seating and a lot of cargo area in the back. That generally is why a lot of people want to upgrade from a mid-size crossover like a Highlander or a Pilot into something like a Chevy Tahoe or a Suburban, is because they want the extra cargo room and they want the extra seating room. Well, a minivan like this will give you both of those things in an easier to park package that's going to handle better and be an awful lot more fuel efficient. Out on a rougher road like the gravel road that I'm on here, you'll certainly notice that the higher profile tires in the Carnival give this more cushion and a better ride than you'll find in a lot of high-end SUVs or crossovers. That's because for some reason the big wheel trend that we see in a lot of CUVs out there hasn't hit the minivan segment for some reason. So you won't find 20 or 21 or 22 inch tires with 30 series profile tires on these vehicles. Instead, you'll find a little bit more rubber that definitely makes the ride a little bit better, especially on longer highway journeys or out on rougher roads. Bearing in mind that I've only driven the top 2 trims of Carnival, which do have acoustic laminated side glass, cabin noise in here has been the lowest that I've measured in the minivan segment at 70.9 decibels, just under 71 decibels basically. Now, I suspect that if you get the other versions of the Carnival, then you're going to get a little bit more wind noise into the front passenger area and driver area because you won't have those laminated side windows. Road noise is definitely very well controlled, especially road noise from the back, and that's an area where some minivans can struggle a little bit. As far as fuel economy goes, I've been averaging 22.1 miles per gallon over a very, very short 2 days with this Carnival. Keep in mind that I haven't been able to have this for a complete week. I haven't been able to drive this on my usual fuel economy test loop. I suspect that based on what we've seen out of Hyundai and Kia's latest engine designs and their new 8-speed automatic transmission, that this should be getting right around the EPA average as long as you're driving in a similar driving style to that EPA average. So mostly highway, not a lot of stop and go. It's worth noting that this engine does not have an idle start-stop feature, so if that's something that you're not a fan of, you might want to look at this. On the other hand, if you're looking for lowest cost of operation and highest fuel economy, you should be looking at the Pacifica Hybrid or the Sienna Hybrid. The Pacifica Hybrid is likely going to be the lowest cost to operate because of its plug-in nature and the cost of electricity in America, and the Sienna Hybrid is by far going to be the most efficient vehicle, period. Bottom line, out on the road, the Carnival is a quiet, comfy, and boxy place to spend your time. Although the driving nature of this vehicle is not as un-minivan as the styling inside and out, I actually think that's a good thing, because generally speaking, minivans are actually a little bit better to drive than some of those larger crossovers, or especially those larger SUVs that you'll find in the United States. Now to the nitty-gritty. How much will it cost to put a fun fair in your driveway? The base model is going to start at $32,100. That's for the LX trim. It gets the 8-inch touchscreen infotainment system, which is smaller than the ones you've seen in these models, and it gets cloth upholstery. It's the only model with cloth. It's also a 7-seat minivan. It doesn't have the removable center seat that we find in that SX model right over there. If you want 8-passenger seating, that's a $2,000 bump up to $34,100. That may sound like a big price bump for one extra seat, But that package also bundles with it the powered driver's seat, imitation leather upholstery, and heated front seats. Key features that I suspect most minivan shoppers will be interested in. It is worth noting that the imitation leather upholstery that we find in the SX trim all the way down the line to that LX with the option package is going to be a lot easier to clean than a typical cloth minivan seat. This SX Prestige model is the only one with real leather according to their spec sheet. The EX trim is the next level up in the lineup. That's $37,600. The big feature gain on that interior is the 12.3-inch LCD instrument cluster. The SX trim, that one right over there, $41,100. That's where we get the rear seat entertainment system. That is an 8-passenger vehicle as well, as is the EX. Then the Prestige model for $46,100 goes back to 7-passenger seating because we get that throne-like second row. Depending on the features you're looking for in your next vehicle, the SX trim might be the best competitor to the top-end trims of something like the Honda Odyssey in its Elite trim, because a lot of the feature set in that SX is pretty similar to that Elite model. Now, it is worth noting that for some reason, the dual-pane moonroof that we find on this model, the large LCD instrument cluster, and the real leather upholstery are not available on that SX model. I really wish that Kia would perhaps bump things up a little bit in the SX trim and give us some of those creature comforts that we find in this model with the more conventional second row, because I think that would be a little bit more interesting to a wider variety of minivan shoppers in the US. But if you're looking for something with the most ridiculous second row available outside of a $100,000 luxury car, that would certainly be this SX Prestige model. And this is certainly one of the most comfortable minivans currently on sale. But the main selling point for the Carnival clearly is that this is a minivan that doesn't necessarily scream minivan quite as loudly as a Chrysler Pacifica or a Honda Odyssey. I don't think it's really going to fool anybody. I think that someone approaching this is probably going to think, isn't that a minivan? Rather than, hey, that's a minivan. If that's the level of discreetness that you're looking for, then clearly the Carnival qualifies. But it's also incredibly practical. We have an enormous cargo area behind this hatch. Over 40 cubic feet of storage space. We still have the ability to put 4x8 sheet goods in most versions of the Carnival. So as far as practicality goes, I think this actually ties the Chrysler Pacifica in normal format with its fold-into-the-floor second-row seats. The fold-into-the-floor second-row seats in that Pacifica will give you pretty similar cargo capacity to this, with the added practicality of those second-row seats that will tumble into the floor and tumble forward with the child seat latched into place. But if you're looking for something with more comfortable seats, that's going to be the Carnival. They do come out, you'll have to move them yourself, but they are going to be more comfortable than the ones that we find in the Pacifica. And both of these vehicles will give you more cargo room than we find in the Sienna or in the Honda Odyssey. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. And of course, stay tuned because I haven't had very much time with these Carnivals. I've only had them for a day and a half. So hopefully I will have them back soon for a complete review and full comparison section. But if you want to know basically how these stack up against the competition, stay tuned because I will have a minivan roundup video coming up soon. And I was able to squeeze a few clips of the Carnival into that video where I pit the Chrysler Pacifica Hybrid, the new Toyota Sienna Hybrid, and the Honda Odyssey directly against one another. I'll see all of you next week.